welcome. Welcome everybody. And we'll just go jump to the next slide there. Yeah, really happy to welcome you all today for our session on building connected team capability. I'm joining you from the lands of the Boon Wurrung people here in the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, as well as to the traditional owners of the lands wherever you're joining us from today. And we are here today to explore how learning makers, which is a term that we made up because we have the privilege of working with people who work in more corporate L&D spaces, people who work in tertiary education, people who work in community building as well. And so learning makers was this term we made up to include all of you. But how can we all build and use connected teaming capability to help bridge this imagination deficit, which on the next slide, that idea came from this report by Deloitte, right? That idea of the imagination deficit being a thing that we need to think about building, given the, rapidly advancing technology, increased uncertainty, exponential change that's happening, and that in that context, that these human capabilities are going to be even more important. And we've got there on the slide, the Deloitte definition of connected teaming, really that ability to collaborate effectively across all kinds of boundaries that we can imagine, and even new ones like human-machine boundaries, and work in a way that's, based on empathy, strengths-based, and connected to the motivations of all the people on the team. So, when we did a survey on LinkedIn, what was the driving forces of why connecting teaming was important to folks? Around 70% of people said it was in relation to innovation and change initiatives or work that was happening in their organization. The next, and like 70% of people responded that. So that might be the case for you all here. If you've got a different reason why connected teaming is important to you, feel free to share in the chat as well. But those needs around change and innovation work, navigating, collaborating across geographies, navigating a matrix, and even human machine collaboration, some of those reasons why this is important. But as we can see on the next slide, this need for connected teaming is not something new. And on the next slide, on the next slide, on the next slide, we can see, oh, is it just me who can't see? Now the human machine collaboration is not being effective. Thanks, Jerry. Oops, no, back one. Yeah, thank you. Like as I said, this need for connected teaming is not a new one. The Indigenous Australians for tens of thousands of years, recognize the economic, social, cultural benefits of collaboration across boundaries, and it's quite impressive when you think about the vast geographical distances that were needed to be traversed in order to have this collaboration through extensive trade networks that saw stone tools, ochre, exchanged across the continent, ceremonial gatherings like the Bunya Festival in Southeast Queensland, where I grew up, which saw thousands of people come from hundreds of kilometers to settle disputes, to share stories, to arrange marriages, to exchange goods, as well as share Dreamtime stories, a way of creating that shared cultural narrative for those economic, social, cultural benefits that we talked about. So it's been a need that's been around for a long time, and an inspiration that we're going to be drawing on today is from Chaos Pilot on the next slide, which has been thinking about this idea of this need for people who are able to navigate in times of turbulence and complexity for more than 30 years. So something that's definitely relevant still today, and be able to have that imagination to turn dreams and ideas into sustainable projects. And I think a thing that's core in their approach is this idea of a team-based pedagogy, which we're going to talk about a bit later. And Alchemy is really proud to be Chaos Pilot's partner in Australia and offering their programs and approach to people, which we're going to be drawing on today. And it's great to see so many alumni from those experiences here with us. So another source of inspiration for us today is going to be not only the slide changer, but also our guest speaker, Jamie Martin, who's on the next slide. Jamie is a freelance learning designer, author, keynote speaker, coach, and facilitator. He's also the former director of the Centre for Australian Army Leadership, which is when we first met Jamie when he was in that role. And yeah, proud to say he's one of our Chaos Pilot Masterclass alum for part 1 and 2. And Jamie's going to be sharing a great case study with us in the session. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you.
So yes, on the next slide, we've got our outcomes for today. So it's really exploring that case study, seeing what that can, what insights, ideas that can give us for building connected teaming in your work. Introduce some Chaos Pilot tools and principles to support that, and hopefully inspire you to experiment with one of the ideas or insights you got from today to apply it in your work. So being able to translate it into your context. How we're going to do that is really focused on the case study. We're going to do some small group breakouts as well, use the chat audio. We've set up some Google Slides, the harvesting, just given the time we don't have to navigate anything more complex than that. And we are recording to be able to share an edited version with yourselves and other people who signed up, and really wanting to highlight these thinking environment components of attention. So, listening with attention and giving a quality of time when you're in those small groups, and ease. Let's enjoy ourselves as well. And if you've got any questions as we go, it's a more intimate group today, so we should be able to answer those as we go, hopefully, but otherwise we can get back to you as well. And our agenda or our arches for today. So, ultimately we're trying to help create better futures for all that, bridge that imagination gap, and build connected teaming capability. So our first arch that we're about to start landing here is around setting the stage, building connection conditions and context. Then we're going to start working with the case study. So what would you do? So Jamie's going to share a bit of the challenge that he received and start getting your brains activated in how you might approach it. Then he's going to share highlights on how he approached it, and also some kind of Chaos Pilot tools that can support that. And then start thinking about how you might bring that back to your work and your context at the end. Oh, before 12. So let's get started. And big believers in connection before content. And storytelling is a great way to promote connection and start getting us immersed in this theme of connected teaming. So in a sec, we're going to open up some breakouts, and in those breakouts, we would love to invite you. I think this one's got animation, Jamie, if you want to just give it a click. We'd love to invite you to set appoint a timekeeper so we can help promote, give us a bit of structure for equality. And we'd love you to tell the people in your group about a time when you experienced connected teaming, when there really was that effective collaboration across boundaries or whatever kind, when there was that empathy, when it was built on empathy, you're able to tap into each other's strengths and motivations, and really do use your time. I was in a session yesterday and kind of people felt they'd stopped after 10 seconds, but didn't kind of wait for those new waves of thinking to come out. So do use up your 1.5 minutes. And yeah, explore that experience from all angles. How did it feel? What made that connected teaming possible? What did that connected teaming facilitate, or the impact of it? So yeah, just kind of immersing ourselves a little bit in that concept from our own experience, and seeing what insights it can give us to get us started. And yeah, take a listen out for any key themes that might come up from there. I'm curious, just any particular themes that you felt kind of came up through the different stories that were told? Anything that stood out to anybody about those collective connected teaming experiences?
I think what stood out for me was just the energy behind the storytelling. So even though people only had a minute and a half, you could just straight away your heart sung in tune with the way their heart was singing, particularly Jasmine, who's literally just come out on a massive high out of a session. So that was really cool in terms of like a sniff test. The energy was there and the connectivity was there.
Awesome. Thanks, Ruth. Any other themes that kind of stood out to people?
The power in connection, I think that was, and it not just being an I process in anything. It's all about what's the room saying, what's the vibe, and using that energy to drive, I think. Yeah.
Nice. Thanks. Yeah, the comment remind me to come back to that about not about the I think there's an interesting kind of paradox a little bit in that one that we can explore a little bit later. Awesome. Well, hopefully it was energizing for you all as well to remember your own connected teaming experiences and to hear those of others as we're getting started. I'd like to hand over now to Jamie, who's going to kick us off with the What Would You Do launch and challenge launch and start getting your brains as well thinking about what will be important in the context he's going to share. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, Zoe. Great to see you all here today, and thanks for having me. Hopefully we can have some interesting discussions because we've got a smaller group. Also happy to take questions as we go through the different parts. We've got some Q&A sort of spots allocated, but happy to throw a question in the chat or raise your hand and we can just ask a question about that bit that we're looking at. Because, really this is about what you get out of it. It's not about me just talking. So context for this case study that I'm going to present to you. So basically this is about March last year is when I was first given this opportunity to create an event. And the event was basically for the Australian Defence Force to bring together junior leaders from all three services, so Navy, Army, and Air Force, in a totally different way than would be a standard conference or something. And the whole thing was about enhancing leadership culture in the Defence Force for the future. So it was all about engaging junior leaders. So these 6 points here are kind of stuff that was told to me at the outset. So, not really a design brief, but this is the things that were thrown at me. So basically it was about inspiring junior leaders. You can see there, number 1. Number 2, don't make it boring, obviously, because we don't want it to be something that people have to go to. It's something they want to go to. Number 3, don't make it like a standard conference. Number 4, but you have to have the Chief of Defence Force as the opening address. So you have to have a bit of normal kind of conference bit in there. Number 5, all 3 services need to be involved and the public service, which was thrown in a bit later, right? It was originally going to be just Navy, Army, Air Force. And then they're like, oh, hang on, we need to include the public service. So had to throw that in part way along. And then finally, I had to justify why I was doing it, even though I didn't have a good design brief, and then win my own funding by writing the business case to get it up off the ground to start with. So, probably similar to lots of other projects, right? So this is what I was asked to do in vague terms, and I was given basically a 2-day event. Okay, that's what we want to do. We want to do a 2-day event. So that's the challenge. It's a little bit foreign maybe for some of you for your space that you're working in, but also similar. Okay, so we've got different cultures. We've got 3 different parts of the Defence Force that bring their own ways of doing business, their own norms and practices, and the APS, which is left field as well. And then you get a fairly not clear design challenge, right? So you have to figure out, how am I going to do this that I'm going to actually be able to structure it and make something useful and get after it. So that's the challenge. What we want to do now is say, all right, if you were given this challenge, something very similar to this in this particular case, what might you do? Okay, and this is just to get your brains thinking, and then we'll go through capturing some of that of what everyone's come up with, and then we'll go, all right, what bits have you thought of that we thought of as well, and what other things did we come up with that and how do we apply it? So the challenge here is looking at that that brief, those 6 points that I just put up there. We're going to throw you into your breakout groups again and try and come up with 3 how might we questions that shape how you might do this in terms of achieving connected teaming for this group. About 200 people, okay, is the context, about 200 people, all 3 services plus public service. So what are the top 3 things you must focus on in designing for the participants in order to make this a connected teaming success? Okay, and Zoe's going to throw a Google slide deck link into the chat. I'll take you across to Miro and I'll show you at the conceptual phase where we were bouncing around ideas, and then how we took the audience on the journey to design the event, because we actually designed it with them, which is all part of the agency piece. So jump out of here and I'll go across to Miro, and this page is, if you can see that there, our initial concepts and themes that we were playing with to start with. All right, so you'll see in here up the top, there's a bit of theme stuff from different events we've either been to or we like the feel of. Then we started off with some rough sketches, learning arches, and then a bit more in-depth ones here. And you can see when we were designing the actual event, we were wrestling with this idea of, how do we bring in some really interesting speakers, but not have it like a normal conference where you're just sitting there getting talked at, right? So this is the balance we were trying to go with. And what are the key themes we're focused on? So these questions we put to the audience as we designed it. So what do you want it to be like? What are the ideas we want to tackle? So originally I came up with 6 different themes and a whole stack of speakers. You'll see all these profiles over here. And we tested these themes with the audience. So we ran little learning design sprints on Miro with groups of the audience over a 6-month period. So they, about 180 or so people jumped on in groups of 10 to 15 and were part of the whole process. So the aim was, if we could get about 80% of the people that turn up at the event have already been part of it and they've already contributed to what it's going to look like, then agency is already happening. And when they get there, we already have connection in some smaller groups across the services. So they'll already know people and they'll already have a feel of what they're going to expect when they rock up. So we're already got that one step ahead in terms of connection and context and agency. And if you've got stuff that you're throwing in the chat, I won't be watching it, but I'll just get prompted when there's a question. So I'll show you what an example of one of the little workshops that we did. So here's one of the little workshops, and basically we did it like a lightning decision jam, if you've done that format, where you're looking at a key idea, we used the sailboat what's moving us forward, what's holding us back around this theme. And then you go on and look at barriers, and then what are the initiatives that can help you break down those barriers and move the organization forward. So in these types of workshops, we'd have a whole group of people come up with the ideas, come up with, voting on them, then moving them forward. And we do that over about a 2-hour time frame. And so at the end of that time, we'd get to an outcome that would inform the design process. Does that make sense to everyone? So this was our co-creation method, but we created structure around it, and we used the tool that most people hadn't really played with in the Defence Force. They hadn't used collaborative tools like Miro, and and this was also during the back end of COVID, right? So some of the restrictions were still around, so people were kind of used to jumping on virtual calls, and so we could jump in, run these sessions pretty quickly, and get everyone involved, get ideas, and keep going and engage as much of the audience as possible. So I'll just jump back out of there. Any questions on that whole initial process or that initial conceptual phase? Anyone want to throw anything out there? Yep, go for it.
Jamie, brilliant. Number one. Number two, the question is more around, what were your touch points, your checkpoints to make sure you're still seeing the dream? Or was that driven by the aha, like, yep, from the people who were going to be part of, like, the participants? Like, how did you keep on that track?
Yeah, so I guess we, myself and Wade, who was my colleague who we were building this together, we had this vision of the experience we wanted to be creating for the participants. And so the very first Lightning Decision Jam session we did, we're already building that experience, right? So people are already coming together in groups they wouldn't normally. They're already engaging with topics that they wouldn't normally get to at their level. It's organizational level ideas. And we're wrestling with concepts, and everyone's voices are being heard. So from the very first session, we're already creating the experience, and that experience goes over a whole period of time and culminates with the event. So the event's not the thing, it's the culmination, I guess. So we were happy with the fact that, like, these sessions could be messy. We're debating these ideas and wrestling with them, but that's good because that's the experience we want.
That's where it is. Yeah, perfect.
So the gold was happening all the way. Yeah. Any other questions?
Maybe I was just going to ask you, you said that you had to put the business case together and get the funding to support that. So did you do that before you started co-creating?
Yeah. I'd already got the approval beforehand, and we had to link to big issues in the Defence Force in that business case so that we could get the funding from the right area, right? And this is all about cultural change and cultural improvement and leadership. So it wasn't too hard to make the case, but it was, I had to jump through a bunch of hoops with some committees to get the funding. Yeah. But I guess the committee would have no idea on what the final product is. It's just that we're doing something good for a certain sector and improving those elements that they were funding, right?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That would be the real hard thing, because it wouldn't be so tangible to get that upfront, that commitment from them, when it's still quite, still in the morphing stage.
Yeah, what we did, and I haven't brought it up here, is we created like a pitch deck that I sent out to a bunch of the senior leadership across the Defence Force to say, this is what we're creating. This is our methodology of the engaging with the audience, and this is the outcome we're seeking, and this is why the journey contributes to that outcome. That was separate to the business case, because I needed to get the senior leadership, so the Chief of Air Force, Chief of Army, the Chief of Defence Force, all supporting this, and they all got on board as soon as they got that brief, because they're like, yeah, of course, we want to do this, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't have to make any decisions. They had to just endorse it.
Yeah. And I think, and maybe just, taking advantage of this, so many masterclass alumni here. I think that's a great example of the hidden curriculum coming to life, right? It's like knowing, well, we want them to be practicing, practicing that collaboration, having agency, whatever. How do we like imbue that from the word go? And that not just be a theme we're talking about, but they're actually living it. Like we can bring it to life in the way that it's delivered, I guess.
And I guess what we were intending on the actual event was to do this at scale. So the way we were doing the small engagements, we were going to make that a reality, but for 200 people. So everyone already had a go at using the tools and the methods that we're going to do, but in a huge sort of setting. So that was also like training them on the process as well. Yeah.
Because there were maybe like 20 or something people, was it, Jamie, in those like virtual sessions?
Yeah. Usually anywhere from 12 to 20, somewhere around 15 to 18, most of them. Yeah. So enough to people to speak and engage and debate online and using the tools where everyone's ideas were happening at the same time. Yeah. All right. So that's a bit of the design journey. Now I'll share screen again and we'll talk about, once this wakes up, I'll talk about, so what did we actually do? So in terms of that first, how might we question, we aim to do like these three things as our published objectives: inspiring junior leaders, cross-enterprise relationships, and empowering participants to contribute to that future, right? The future of the Defence Force and the future of the leadership. And in doing that, and I've already talked about this point that I was going to tell you about, which was the whole journey of having them involved. And at the end of the day, they chose the speaker shortlist. They chose the themes that we ended up working on. And the themes were about agility, so organizational agility, learning, retention, and human performance. So those 4 themes were the themes we explored across the 2 days, and they chose them out of about 20 ideas that started, and we got right down and we decided on those 4 themes. And then we had speakers who weren't doing traditional speaker roles, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, but they were like provocateurs, right? They were putting ideas out there. Then we would run activity. Then they would come back and throw some more ideas out there, and then they would sum up that session. And so the audience had chosen who they wanted to hear from as well. That's it. That fit within our design, and then we sequenced it. So what did it look like? Sorry,
so
go.
Jamie, I just wanted to highlight that a little bit, because maybe, I don't know, maybe for most of us who are like more used to, say, corporate or tertiary education settings, seeing folks together there in the video, or just what you described, right? Like people choosing the themes, people helping to choose the speakers or whatever. How unusual or different is that for this audience group?
Yeah.
Dave might be able to speak to that as well, but yeah, how unusual is that for this audience group?
Extremely is the simple way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like this was our whole point around agency, right? So this demographic of the Defence Force feels like they don't have agency to change the organization, because you have those high ranking people that make all those decisions, right? But the reality is that demographic, if they get their ideas to the right people, they can have a big impact. Just they don't know it. A very few people experience that because they actually just go guns blazing and find the right avenue and break through all the corporate malaise and get to the right point, and their idea gets up. But it's the exception rather than the norm. But the thing is, they can actually have a difference, can actually make a difference. And the senior leaders want to hear from them. Just there's this frozen middle, this barrier that stops all the ideas. And that happens in so many organizations, and Defence Force is, exactly a prime example of that. So that agency piece, what we wanted to do also was put them in a situation that they wouldn't normally get to be part of. So the whole experience is breaking out of the mold of what types of events do these junior leaders normally get to do and normally get invited to, right? So the generals and the admirals, they'll get to go to fancy cocktail dinners and whatever, right? But we wanted to give these people an experience that's totally different to them. So we secured the function space at Jones Bay Wharf in Sydney. You can see there, and we got the catering, and we got like the best room and everything. So it was like 5-star event. Okay, and awesome food, awesome view out to the Sydney Harbour. They were in civilian clothes, not in uniform, and it was all like very, fancy decorations and all that sort of stuff. And we themed it all in our branding across the whole event. So very different to any military type of thing you would normally go to, right? This was kind of our little mantra, because it was all about designing the future and designing the future of leadership. And so we had like all the different branding and the signage and everything as you walked in. And then we had speakers that are not what you would expect at a military event, right? So Jason Fox up there, super animated dude, big beard, very outspoken guy who throws a lot of ideas and makes it all fun. And he was our first guy to set the tone after the Chief of Defence Force to open the event. So it was really important for us that first couple of hours that we brought the right tone and environment, and the vibe was set correctly for all the collaborative activities that would happen over the 2 days. So Jason, we work closely with Jason about what are the challenges we're putting to the audience, how are we breaking down the mold of what they're thinking when they come in, how are we getting to think outside the box, how are you getting to think that they can actually make a difference and change things. And so that's what we did with Jason, and that set the tone really, really well, and you could feel it in the room as we went into the first activities. And then we had Juliet after lunch. She's a behavioral scientist, and she was talking about how the environment shapes your decision making, and why you might think a certain way and how you can break that mold. And that helped us as we were going into our divergent design activities in the afternoon. And then we got everyone engaged really early with sharing stories. So how we got you guys to share stories at the start here? Well, that was one of our first activities, was in small groups, in their tables, and then in larger groups, and then culminating in about 6 or so main stories that were shared about how effective leaders have shaped the environment for them in their career. Okay, and so it was all about gathering what are the important conditions that we need to be building in the future to make this environment excellent and give us space to create new ideas. And so we used storytelling as that very first connection activity that was linked in with Jason's talk, and that built us into a design activity of identifying all the conditions that we need to create and all the barriers to those conditions being effective, if that makes sense. And so we had, it was all very interactive. So we had a big canvas, which I'll show you in a second, and then we were using Miro also at scale. And I'll talk you through how and why we use those, and then we'll go from there. So a couple of little other techniques and engagement strategies that we use. So these are some of the core facilitation techniques I designed into it, and this was all about achieving that agency, transparency, etc. So we did things like, you can read it all there, but storytelling. We had brainstorming, like individual then group type of brainstorming activities when we're diverging. We used a whole bunch of visual stuff. So we had the canvases, we had Miro, we had stuff up on the screen so you could see what everyone was doing. we had voting with your feet activities at certain points, peer feedback, peer validation. We had a panel towards the end, and we also were facilitating this in a really we kept it rolling really well with the speakers and myself and Wade as the lead facilitators across the room. And then in terms of the some of the engagement strategies, so we changed up the pace of what we're doing. So some things we would go really fast and then we'd give space. So we varied the pace. We use interactive stuff. All those things you can see there. We used a lot of heat mapping and voting, gamification type things when we were testing ideas and when we were refining ideas. So yeah, Wade and I were the lead facilitators. So you'd think, and we were the designers and we ran it from the start, but you'd think, okay, how am I going to facilitate a room of 200 people, right? It's not like, a group of 12 or 15, but because we'd created the structure around, it's sort of like structure created freedom, right? We had the events and the tools that everyone was doing with really clear instructions, so we could get up and pitch the idea and get them going, and then they would go into it, and then we could bring them back for another, like a bit like disturbance, right? Knowledge disturbance. We would jump up with a microphone and go, all right, what about this, this, and this? Because we just heard from Jason about this. Have you thought about that? And then it would go back into something. And then we would bring up an example from one group and say, hey, this group's thinking about this. What are you guys thinking over here? And so we could keep that moving in that way, which actually worked quite well. Any questions before I talk about some of the tools, or any thoughts? Oh, all right, I'll keep going on some of these tools, and then we can have some Q&A. So we created these canvases, and these were quite massive. So they're about 4 meters long by 2 meters tall or something. And that is in 2 parts. So day 1 is on the left, day 2 is on the right. So 2 canvases. So the day 2 ones were hiding. So we had, for day 1, and we had them up on stands, and we had about 8 of them. So we had tables grouped into like subgroups, and we had about 30 people or so per subgroup, which was like 3 tables. And then we would get them working on one canvas when we did those activities. So we would get them to, when we challenged them with a particular question, they would then put their ideas up on the canvas, and that would be a visual tactile part of the engagement. And then for another piece, they would come onto Miro and do it all individually for a next piece. So we used both a combination of getting everyone up and moving and talking and using sticky notes and writing. And then for certain things, we would get people to build in Miro digital by themselves on their iPad or their laptop, because the stuff we were building on Miro, we were building to a digital outcome. And the stuff we were building here was all about debate and collaboration in person and writing, because we wanted to get the best thinking. And then they would take that written stuff and then refine to the next bit on the digital space. So it was quite complex from what you might think, but it was actually simple once you start doing it. But there was tactile and then there was digital, because at the end of the day, the final products were going to be digital, which allowed us to capture and publish it out of the event. And so you'll see like there's what the canvases look like, big boards there, lots of sticky notes, lots of Sharpies, a whole room full of 200 Sharpies and about 1,000 sticky notes. You've never seen so many sticky notes in your life, but it worked. And then in terms of Miro, and I can show you the actual space in a second, but this was, this is the biggest group I've done on Miro, with 200 people doing stuff. And we were like pushing the software to its limits, you know, with that many people working. But it was pretty cool when you have everyone on there, everyone's going at once, you see everyone's cursors and everyone's ideas cascading out, and then going towards the next thing, and then the voting and the heat mapping, which you can do with some cool functions in the space. So you can actually do voting if you create the tiles correctly, and you can vote on the tiles and will automatically tally it for you. And I can show you that in a second. But what it allowed people to do is everyone could put their idea in, right? It doesn't matter if you're a shy person, doesn't matter if you didn't want to grab the microphone, you can get your idea up on the canvas, and if you're for the certain bits, and you can get your ideas into Miro, and you can vote. Everyone has a vote. Okay, there was no one who didn't have an agency in the journey, and every event or every part of the event built on the next thing. So something that we did here would then get taken to the next activity, would then get built, and then get refined down. Then that would move to the next thing. So everything they built cascaded into across the 2 days to the final outcome. So I'll show you quickly on the Miro space, and then I can sum this up and we can do some questions. Show you that quickly.
And just while you're doing that, Jamie, it occurred to me as well that, you know, I think that those visual collaboration, both tactile and digital, and that agency, like that was also like helping to multiply you and Wade as facilitators, right? Because it wasn't like, you know, that helped to create that, invisible kind of guidance as well for people, which I think is really clever.
Yeah. So we were like, we built the instructions into the tools, and we also had, on the tables, we had little QR codes where you can scan. So for this activity, scan here, and you get the instructions for that activity up on your phone. And then you just follow the instructions to do that piece. So we made it so that we didn't have to print a whole bunch of stuff. There was no printing, or there was with some QR codes. It's the only thing we printed out, right? Everything was digital or on the boards.
Yeah.
And so we weren't burning the Amazon as well. And so this is where everyone could work when we got them in. And so there was a bunch of stuff we did on day one. So that's workshop 1. So that's in the first part of day 1. Workshop 2 is in the afternoon of day 1. And so you can see all the different sailboats where we were trying to uncover the barriers, which were the ones on the bottom there. And everyone was building these together. And then what we ended up getting towards was on the second day. So we then created a bunch of initiatives on how we might tackle these barriers across these themes in the organization. And we gave people little templates to pitch their ideas. So all they had to do was fill in the blanks. And so we could get as many ideas as possible and then vote on them. So you can see there's like 100 and something ideas that people have created. So we just created all the templates and go, all right, go in, claim a template, start building. And then we could bring them all up and people could then go in and review it and vote. You can see the ones with heaps of votes. And then we built towards that into how you might execute on these ideas. And so what we then created was a final voting area, which ended up with our top ones, okay, which were down the bottom there. And then we gave people we then did a voting with your feet. So the top 8 or 9 initiatives, we put up posters around the room, and then people went to the location they wanted to develop out and work on and be part of that team. And then that team was then given guidance on creating their initiative into an actual product that they could pitch. And then we had a template, basically a bit like a business case or a business plan. What problem are you solving? What's the value proposition to the organization? What's your solution? How do you introduce it? Resourcing, metrics, risks, etc. and that allowed people to rapidly build out their ideas. And then also we created a system around how do we prototype this and test it, and can you do it with the audience in the room? So we got to the point where on day 2, the ideas were pitched to everyone with a couple of people up front on the microphone, and then we tested the validity of the idea in execution with the audience, with either different surveys, different activities, and we gave them help on how they would prototype and test this. And finally, we had an evaluation panel of some senior leaders listening into that last session to give them feedback on how they might get resourcing, funding, and execution, and who would own it, like which part of the organization would take ownership and progress this idea. So, and that's why we did a lot of this stuff on Miro, because it allowed us to capture everything, move it from there into an actual plan, and then we could publish all the findings in a report, which we did. It was about a 60-page report with all our methodology, what happened, and then what did everyone create, and where should it go, and what impact should it have in the organization. So there's something tangible that could come out that everyone can refer to and can be published, and all the people, senior leaders that weren't there, which was a lot, could read it and understand and also get briefed on it. So that's why, another reason why we use those tools as well. Hopefully that makes sense. I'll give you just sum up with some of the feedback, and then happy to take some questions and talk through any of this. I know we're running tight on time there, Zoe. Actually, won't worry about the feedback slides.
Yeah, we can share that. Yeah.
Yeah, we can share that. Yeah. So, yeah, any questions or anything before we go on to the final bit? So I've been talking a fair bit.
I'm blown away just by the whole concept of it. Like, I think the fact that you stretch people so far away from the normal expectations, identity of what people know as the services, services personnel and the environment that they work in, and the commitment that you got to do that over a period of time is incredible. So amazing job. I had a couple of questions just on the way that you ran it and the slides that you shared. One was, when you had those, 200 ideas, how did you get them to review all of those? Did you sort them into themes, or was there a process to do that? I'll do that one first, and then I just had one other.
Yeah, that basically we got we gave them a way to scan and evaluate individually and then as groups. So we didn't theme them, which we would normally do for design stuff. We got them to like scan in sectors and then discuss in their groups, and then we went to individual voting to narrow it down.
Oh, thanks, Jamie. The other one was just when you had those final short list of ideas, did you keep people in the same groups, or did you get them to vote for what they wanted to work on?
Yeah, that we then did the voting with your feet. So they could even if they didn't vote for that thing, but they wanted to work on it, they could go over and join that group.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm blown away by it. I want to be there. I want to be at the event.
It was fun.
Thanks, Joanne. Any other questions for Jamie? I think we can. Yeah.
Sorry, just popped into my head right then. Jamie, this was, I guess, a little bit ago. Do you know any ideas of what the impact of this has been now?
Yeah, so this was in April this year, April 3rd and 4th.
Right. Yep.
So a lot of there's a huge amount of conversations that happen around the organization afterwards. And unfortunately, the Chief of Defence Force was changing over like 2 months later, who is a big proponent of this. So a lot of the work went into the Chief of Personnel's office, which is a 3-star general. We have tried to get an audience to back brief other senior leaders. That a lot of the products have gone out, but we haven't done face-to-face discussions with them to say, this is where we think this should go. But some of these ideas are being progressed in the right areas around the organization, but we haven't had like key engagements with those senior leaders to get their thoughts as the whole leadership changeover has been happening. So it's having an impact, but haven't got that tangible engagement with the senior leaders.
Yeah, no
as
tick
such.
box, but
Mm.
you know, there's already how many with people? 200 visionaries out there with that, you know, the energy to
Mm.
push for anything really.
Yep.
Oh, thanks.
No worries.
No worries. And yeah, I know we're coming up on the end of the time, but you know, I'm happy to stay on a bit afterwards as well if anyone has any other questions. But yeah, just maybe to help us land, it'd be great to know, yeah, what stuck out to you from today in terms of ideas or insights that you want to in your context, in your work, maybe kind of take forward and try to experiment a bit with when it comes to connected teaming. Whoever wants to either go in the chat or they're a small group, so feel free to come off mute as well.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway through what you've shared, Jamie, was around from the get-go, they choose the themes and what that does, you know, throughout in terms of the agency taken and the interest and the commitment to follow through. So it's so easy to get caught up with thinking you understand what the learning needs are or what the problems, you know, the solution should be. So I just, mind blown by the process that you ran and just really those basics of how you actually start right. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great point, Ruth, because when you talk to other organizations and have worked with a bunch of different companies in private sector, which is where I'm working now, people are like, no, we have to achieve the things that we want to achieve as the leaders. And it's like, hey, do you? If your people think this is really important to tackle, shouldn't that be the thing you're tackling, right? You know, maybe your strategy is off, you know, it's because your people strategy needs to align with your business strategy, because if you don't have people, you can't execute, right? So yeah, people think they need to hold on to these things. It's like, maybe create space for your people to choose.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Ruth. And Vanessa shared her mic with questions. Yeah.
I just wanted to share how I really like how you kind of turned it into a much bigger thing than just a 2-day conference. And I think that's helpful to think about, because you could be a bit overwhelmed by how are we actually going to achieve all this in 2 days. It's not actually very much time when you've got that many people to do this with. So the idea of like, actually, I know you kind of introduced it as a 2-day conference, but the way I see it is like you did a series of workshops over months that reached all these people. And then the 2-day was like the final bit, like the icing on the cake, actually. That was kind of my reading on it. And I like that way of just rethinking that request that you had of just do a 2-day thing, because it was
That's right.
so much more on the end.
Yeah, put a bunch of those request ideas in the bin and come up with how can you have the most impact.
Yeah. Nice.
I think that's why I was asking if it had, I missed the start, but I was asking if it had that organizational transformation agenda already set up, because it's whether you perceive it as a transformational journey or a change objective or a 2-day conference.
Yeah, that was our idea, you know, to have a transformational impact. We were really looking at a 10-year horizon, right? So how can you inspire these people to have an impact over the next 10 years, wherever they go in the organization? Otherwise, it's just like a normal conference.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Ex-Defence Force, it was so nice to see them in civvies, and that concept of taking rank out of the equation, you know, and that leadership, it doesn't matter where it is in the hierarchy, it's leadership. It doesn't matter who's under you, what rank you hold. I don't know if that was a decision driven by you, or is it just like set the premise? Brilliant.
No, that was deliberate. Yeah.
Gold.
And like everyone's name tags, no rank, no organization, where they're coming from. It's just the name. Just the name and the brand.
So strong and powerful that's like, you know, you can tell because of how you've done all that work leading up to it, you know the people, you know what's important. Really nice. Thanks, Jamie.
Great. Cheers.
And I think just even taking that out of a defense context, right? Like I think in the, you know, in the work that we've done with Jamie in defense as well, that it's more in your face, I think, in that environment, in that context, maybe, but I think it's there in so many other organizations, right? Maybe in a more subtle way. So, you know, those little things you talked about, Jamie, around like, you know, not having titles or those things on name tags, and how do you, you know, being aware of those dynamics, and in the way that you set up groups, and the way that you know, how do we address that, right? And maybe, you know, in like the retail space where like it's kind of, you know, the store staff versus the central, you know, there's always those dynamics. They might like look different and have different different names, but I think that's a really key thing. If we are that importance of agency, that importance of, you know, again, hidden curriculum, we want people to be showing leadership. How do we make that known that's not about your job title, right? That there's that invitation to show that at those different levels. Yeah, so it's often, you know, when we in design thinking, we often talk about extreme users, and I think, you know, hierarchy and stuff like that, we might consider defense audience like extreme users in that regard, but I feel like it's a dynamic that we can observe and maybe think about in all different workplaces.
Absolutely.
It also comes down to your dress code, because in defense, even if you're in a defense gathering but not in uniform, officers will wear certain clothes and the sailors will wear different clothes. So we had to make it so it's really clear. This is what you wear. It's quite relaxed. This is the type of clothes that you wear. So everyone's similar. It's not like there's a hierarchy of like flash blazers and then just chinos or, you know, whatever.
Neutral tones on naval officers.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, and I think maybe just to end off, Jamie, you know, I know like it was awesome to see your sketches of your archers on the Miro board. And I know that this is just one of like, you know, tens of different programs that you've designed and run. But I'm curious, you know, when you think back to like the masterclass part 1 and part 2, which you've done, you know, how do you think those tools or approaches kind of influenced this work or supported that work?
I think it really helped because it was all about the experience of the event and how we're taking the not the content, but the feeling of why are they here, what are they learning, what are they contributing. And so all the arches that we ended up with were about that exact experience that we're generating and the mindset that they're leaving with, and how we're taking that mindset on an evolution. So the design, and so the red thread and the hidden curriculum became the star, and the arches were just the vehicle to get that stuff in there. And the content was just part of that experience to get them moving from one thing to the next. So yeah, it was really, I guess I was like extreme user of hidden curriculum and red thread stuff in this. Yeah, so it ended up the arches were so interwoven that they were, you know, interspersed. But it was really good to apply that, you know, into this.
Yeah, and I can see how like using the arches, it helps you recognize that the journey is longer than just those 2 days, right? Because you're thinking about how they're arriving and what's gonna
the big arrow at the end was, you know, the most important.
Yeah, nice. Awesome. Well, and yeah, I mean, I think, you know, you all here have done part 1, and we do have a part 2 coming up in November if anyone's interested in joining. And yeah, that'll be at RMIT, and that's really kind of focused on, okay, you've identified like what you need to develop, and then kind of taking through that design and facilitation process using the arches. Yeah, in that kind of sense. So yeah, happy to chat with anyone about that if you're keen. And yeah, any other questions or thoughts? Great to see your faces again.
Thanks everyone. Really great to meet you all and be a part of it today.
Thanks everyone.
And yeah,
thanks, Jamie. Thanks for organizing, Zoe.
No worries. And massive thanks to Jamie, who, as you can see, is on the road traveling, and yeah, made the time and effort to join us from the hotel room. So really appreciate it.
Good to see you made your bed.
Thanks, Dad.
Military training came in handy.
Yeah,
it's not that good.
Hospital corners are tight.
He's the housekeeper's dream.
Thanks everyone. Have a great
See you later.